Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are going to be taking a look at the late title Tuesday happening today, October 15th. Now in the early title Tuesday I did quite well, scoring 9.5 points out of 11 and finishing third on tiebreak. In the evening title Tuesday I'm back. I'm hoping for more. Keep in mind that I have not won a title Tuesday since August 6th, so it's been over 2 months since I last won, and I'm really hoping to finally get the job done. So we're going to start with a game that I played in 8th round where I had the white piece against the famous streamer and grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. Both of us going into this 8th round game are on 6.5 points out of 7, and let's see what happens. So I've got the white pieces and I start out with the move B3. Now B3 is a move that I played a lot in the recent event, the Global Chess League, and it feels like an easy way to go back to my roots. It's something that I used to play many years ago and just keep it very, very simple. So I play B3. Daniel goes d5, I go bishop b2, he plays bishop f5, I play d3, and now he goes knight f6. Here I play knight d2, and Daniel plays the move e6. Now this is one of the most standard setups versus any of these sort of hyper modern setups with g3 and b3, where black pushes the pawns to d5 and e6, brings the bishop out, and then in the long term just wants to finish the development with bishop e7 and kingside castle. So I go g3. Daniel plays h6 here. He could have played bishop e7 immediately, but probably he was worried that after bishop g2 maybe there would be some tempo with pawn to e4. So he goes h6. I play bishop g2 anyway. He goes bishop e7. I play e4, and now Daniel retreats to h7 with the bishop. Now the setup is very, very solid for black because even though the bishop is very passive on h7, it is permanently spying this long diagonal. So I go knight to h3. Now knight f3 is maybe possible, but there are possible ideas where black can take everything on e4 and be completely fine. So I play knight to h3 here. This way the pawn on e4 is still guarded by the pawn, the knight, and the bishop. But additionally down the road I want to keep this diagonal open for the fianchettoed bishop on g2. So Daniel plays a5. I go a3 here. I could castle of course, but after castles black can play the move a4, and now ideas like a3 could be a little bit annoying. And if I play rook b1 so that I have a3 bishop a1 where the bishop is alive on the diagonal, black can maybe consider trading and playing for something like rook to a2, creating the kebab on the second rank and activating the rook on the open file. So I go a3. Daniel castles. If he were to play a4 here I would of course play b4, and now the pawn on a3 supports the pawn on b4. In the long run maybe even something like c4 where this pawn on a4 could become a potential weakness. So Daniel castles, I castle, and now he plays move knight c6. Now this move came as a bit of a surprise to me because usually in these setups where black has played d5 and e6, usually you try to build the classic pyramid of Giza with these 3 pawns to d5 and the pawns on f7 to d5, and you have this pyramid here where black is very solid and all these pawns protect each other. Instead Daniel goes knight c6 here, putting the knight in front of the pawn, and now I play the move e5. We get knight d7 and I play the move queen to e2, guarding the pawn on e5. Now I did consider playing this move d4 here, but I was actually concerned that after a4, b4, and something like b5, the queen side is getting very clogged here, and let's just say I play rook c1 and knight b6 occurs. This bishop on b2 is very sag. The pawns are in the way on the queen side. You've got d4 and e5. This wooden shield simply has no scope, so it's almost like a dead shield. So I play queen to e2. Now we get the move knight to b6, and here I go knight f4. Now if black were to play a4 b4, this position is a little bit different because if black goes b5 at some point I can maybe play c4, simply opening up the scope for the b on this long diagonal. So we got the move knight b6. I go knight f4. Daniel plays bishop g5, and now I go back to h3, and he goes back to e7. Now at this point I have a very tough decision. I'm on 6.5 points out of 7. I have the 5-time world champion Magnus Carlsen breathing down my neck with 6 out of 7, and I have to make a decision. Do I make the draw by repetition here with knight f4, or do I go for glory? Now having not won title Tuesday in so long, I decide to throw down the gauntlet and play on with rook fd1 because draws are for losers. So I play rook fd1. Daniel plays d4, and this is a move that actually caught me completely by surprise here. It is in fact a very logical move once you see it, but I thought Daniel was gonna have to play something like knight a7 with the idea of c5 and d4, or c5 and c4, but I simply missed this move d4. Now the reason that it's very logical once you see it is that the knight is guarding the pawn, but black simply wants to bring this knight on b6 into the game. Currently the knight does not have a lot of good squares. a4 and c4 are covered by the pawns here. Knight could go back, but then you're going backwards, which is not what you want to do. And so after d4, now Daniel can bring the knight to d5 and maybe jump to c3. Here I go for the move knight f3, trying to prevent knight d5, as now I could take the juicer on d4, and I simply have one extra pawn in the center of the board. So Daniel goes queen d7, I play knight to f4. Now the knight on f3 also prevents black from ever playing bishop g5, because if you go here now, I take, and after knight h3 and f6, takes, and f4. The b's are really active on both the diagonals. Black's king is a little bit weak, my knight is jumping back towards the center, and black has a lot of issues here, as you can see from the valuation. So after knight f4, Daniel goes rook d8, I play the move queen to d2 here. Now during the game, as I was live streaming, I considered both queen to d2 and queen e1 here. Ultimately, I played queen d2 because I thought after queen to e1, my idea was here, let's just say black plays rook to a8 as an example. I go knight to e2 here, and I thought that the queen on e1 is worse off because you're only targeting the pawn on a5 in such a situation, whereas with the queen on d2 here, let's just say rook a8, knight e2 occurs, the queen now has two diagonals available, so I thought the queen was better on the square. So I go queen d2. And now Daniel plays move king h8, and here I go for the move rook to e1, and much to my surprise, or horror you could say, Daniel completely shocks me with this move f6. Now when I played rook to e1, I thought that I was stopping black from playing f6 here because I have the rook and the horse both spying the pawn on e6. But after Daniel goes f6, I wasn't really sure what's going on, so I end up taking. He takes with the rook, of course, to guard the pawn on e6, and now I play the move bishop h3. Now I had a feeling during the game there was something better, and in fact the move knight to e5 would have been very strong here, because after takes, and bishop d6 here, I can sack the rook with bishop takes pawn, and after takes, let's say rook f7 and rook e1. Both of the b's are super active on the diagonals. There's a double wooden shield here, knight on f4 spying the pawn on e6, rook on e1, queen hits the pawn on a5. This is simply a beautiful position for me here, and I probably would go on to win. But instead I play the move bishop to h3, and I did use quite a bit of time here, as you'll see. Actually, was this was the moment. Actually, no, bishop h3 I played instantly, bishop d6, and now I spent a lot of time here. Bishop to h3 was the move that I played because I figure here I'm hitting the pawn with the bishop, the knight, and the rook. Now what I expected Daniel to play was bishop to f5 here, and after takes, something like c4 is quite good, because if black plays the glitch move and peasant with takes, after bishop c3, suddenly the bishop is active, the knight is jumping every which way here, and white should be close to winning. If black doesn't take and say plays move like king g8, now I can play h4, taking away g5, and then go rook e2, rook e1, use the open e file, maybe even h5 to create a bastion on g6, and black is in all kinds of trouble. So Daniel goes bishop d6, and this is where I spent 25 seconds and I play the correct move, rook takes pawn. So at this point in the game, I was thinking about what I could do here. Now the thing is, I don't have a lot of options. If I don't play rook takes pawn, say I go bishop takes, for example, after bishop takes f4, black hangs the queen, but now my queen is under attack. If I take, he takes, and now you'll notice black has 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. I'm missing a piece on the board, and I resign the game. So after takes, for example, even this one, same thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, I resign the game. So I can't go bishop takes. Now if I play knight takes pawn, for example, black will take the knight and sack the rook on d8, but after takes and queen d8, now black has a knight and a bishop in return for the rook, and black should be better. So I can't do that. Now if I can't play either of those moves, what are the other options? Now the only other move that I see besides rook takes pawn here is maybe something like knight takes d4, but even this is actually just losing, because takes, and I lose the bishop on d4. So at the end of the day, I spend 25 seconds and I correctly play the move rook takes pawn. Now I spent a lot of time calculating this, because once I play this move, there are going to be a lot of trades here. The rook's under attack, the knight's under attack, everything is going to be hanging in the next couple of moves, so it's a very good time to invest that time to calculate the line. Luckily for me, this move is correct, and now Daniel is in all kinds of trouble. So he takes the knight. Now I decide to take the rook here, and now you'll notice that both queens are under attack here. However, because I took this pawn on e6, I currently am going to be ahead by 1 pawn. So Daniel takes. If he were to play queen takes h3, I take the bishop with the rook, and now I have a rook in return for a knight, and I should win the game. So he takes the rook, and now very importantly, I take the queen. I do not take the bishop here. Oh, maybe I should have taken the bishop, because I thought here black simply is an extra knight, but apparently after bishop takes d4, now I've got the classic AA battery threatening checkmates. If he takes with the knight, I take with check, collect the horse, and win the game. And if he sacks the rook for the bishop after takes, now my rook is coming to the open file. The knight and the bishop are not active here, and white should be winning due to the weakened black king. Alas, I don't do that. Instead, I decide to take the queen. Daniel takes my queen, I take his horse, and now you'll notice that both of us have 3 minor pieces. He has 2 bishops and a knight, I have 2 bishops and a knight, and after bishop c3, takes, and bishop b7, same number of pieces on the board, but here I have more pawns. Now I'm up 2 pawns here, and I should be on my way to a win. but Daniel plays move c5, and here in my haste I play this move a4 instantly. The reason I play this move is just simply fundamental. I thought that if I play a move like h3 after takes and c4, maybe black can crash through here, use the pass pawns on the c file and create some play. So I play a4 here, but this is actually a serious mistake because now after rook d7 I need to be super precise, and instead I play the move bishop a6 after 2 seconds. Now one of the hardest things, whether it's blitz chess, rapid chess, or classical chess, is knowing when to use your time, when to slow down, and just sensing that moment. And I don't sense it. I play bishop a6, and now after knight to d5, suddenly it's getting very tricky because Daniel is going to create the bastion with knight b4 and permanently pressure these pawns on d3 and c2. And even though I'm better, it will require quite a bit of technique. Now I play the move knight e1, and this is more of a panic move. I use 10 seconds and just play the move. What I should have played was rook to e1 here, because after knight b4 hitting the bishop and d's pawns, I can go bishop to b5 attacking the rook. He moves the rook, and after rook to e2 followed by knight to e1, let's just say we get this position. The rook is on the open file here. I control it with my tower, and I probably will win due to the extra material. Actually, I should say it's 1 pawn, not 2, right? 1 2 3 4 5, or no, it is 2 pawns, and I should win the game. But after I go knight e1, knight b4, bishop c4, and rook e7, now my knight is glued to the pawn, and my rook is very passive. It actually is not in the game at all. If I go to d1, for example, I can't go to d2 because the pawn covers it. Nothing's happening on the a file. All the files on the queen side are completely clogged, and now my task is very difficult, and there's a good chance I won't win. So I go king f1. We get bishop f5. I play f3 here. Keep in mind, the reason I play king f1, not say f3, is now black can create the kebab with rook to e2, hitting the pawns on the second rank. And now if anybody is better, it is in fact black, despite being down a couple of pawns due to the activity of this tower. So I go king f1. Bishop f5, f3. Now I want to put the king on f2, but before I do that, I need to stop rook e2. We get h5, king f2, king g7, and now I play rook c1, trying to guard the pawn and activate the horse. Here Daniel correctly plays knight to a2. I go rook d1. He goes back, trying to ensure that this knight can never move. Also, it's very difficult because if I ever play d4, now after takes knight c2, suddenly black is winning the pawn, and he's pushing Pete with the pawn on c3 going down the board in a hurry. So I go bishop b5, Daniel plays knight d5, and this is simply a mistake here. If Daniel were to just wait here with a move like bishop h7, I can never really activate the knight without hanging the pawn. If I try to guard the pawn, he has knight a2, and then he goes back, and honestly, I'm not really sure how I would have won the game. Instead, he plays knight d5, and he releases my horse. The horse goes to g2, and after I'm able to activate my horse, now the rook is going to come to e1, and because of that, Daniel is probably going to lose. So he plays knight b4, I go knight e3, he drops back, and now I go bishop c4, we get rook d7, and here I play the move f4. Daniel goes back, and now I play rook to e1, and finally, my rook is coming to the e file here. I'm going to be able to move the knight, win the pawn on c3, and it turns into a technical endgame. We get king f8, rook e2, bishop e8, and now I play the move knight to d1, attacking this annoying pawn on c3 and offering the trade of the towers. Now, regrettably, Daniel has to trade the towers. If he moves the rook away, I take. Rook still guards his pawn, and now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 extra pawns. Very straightforward win. So Daniel decides to play the move rook, takes. He goes knight d4. I go king e3, and here, because it's such a simplified endgame with minimal material on the board, the extra material is going to play. Daniel goes here. I play knight to e4, forking the 2 juicers, and he decides to take. Here I take with a pawn. I could have taken with the king actually and simply run to d5, but instead I take with the pawn because what I know is after king e7 and h3, I have 4 connected pawns on the king side. I'm going to snake them up the board and eventually win the game. So we get king f8, g4, takes, king e7. Now I go e5, takes, and the goal is simple. Bring the king forward and use the wide peepos to escort them up the board and win in a few moves. We get knight c6, king e4, knight b4. Now I go g5, trying to push p on the king side, knight c6. I go king d5 here, and Daniel plays king d7, which loses on the spot, but it really doesn't matter because after knight to d4 here, takes, knight f3. Now I go g6. If takes, I have g7, and I'm getting a queen. And if he goes king f8 here to stop the juicer, now I push this one, and with the 2 wide peepos here going up the board, combined with my king being active, this will end very soon as well. So Daniel goes king d7. I play bishop b5 here, pinning the knight on c6, and now with Daniel losing his last real force in the game besides the pawns, he resigns the game because this of course would be completely hopeless. I have a couple extra pawns, extra bishop. He's got a couple of pawns which will both vanish in a couple of moves, and the rest will be very elementary. So after bishop b5, I get a huge win against Daniel to move to 7.5 points out of 8. Now in round number 9, I would draw against Nihal Sarin, who was also having a great event up to that point. And in round 10, I would beat Jan Krzysztof Duda to move into a tie for first place with 9 out of 10. Now, this sets the stage for the final round where I have 9 points out of 10. And the only other player with 9 points is none other than the 5-time world champion, Magnus Carlsen from Norway. So, in this game, I get the white pieces and I open with the move e4. Magnus plays the Sicilian, no holds bar. He wants to play an aggressive game. I go knight f3, and here we get e6, and now I play the move c3. Now, I could have played d4 here, but I'm pretty sure that what Magnus would have gone for was his classic system here, not knight f6, sorry, with a6, c4, knight f6, knight c3, queen c7, a3, and b6, like he played against none other than Gucci Reza Firouzja in the recently completed Global Chess League. Now, again, nothing wrong with this. White is a little bit better, but it requires precision, and black, it's very quick development in this position, and I'm probably going to end up down on time. So instead I play c3 because there's a classic saying, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And when I play c3, this is what is known as the Alpin system, where it's very easy to play for white, and we get the move d5. I take, Magnus takes with the pawn here. He could have taken with the queen, but after knight a3 and d4 and knight b5 and bishop e3, it's very easy to play, and if anybody is better, generally it's going to be white who is pushing. So Magnus takes with the pawn. I go d4, of course, we get knight c6, and now I play bishop b5. Magnus goes knight f6, I castle, and he plays bishop e7, trying to castle his king out of the center. And at this point, I decide to take the pawn. Magnus recaptures, and here I decide to play the move rook e1. Now, I knew this was not the best way to play, but at this point, I was trying to keep it very simple, very easy to play, versus getting into a situation where I'd have to spend a lot of time. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is the only real imbalance in this position are the pawns on d5 and c3. If I can ever block this pawn and get a situation like this, only white can be better due to this weakness in the center of the board. Now, this is very deep positional play. Most of you probably won't understand what I'm talking about, but if anyone's better, it's white, and the move should be pretty straightforward with very, very minimal risk to boot. So Magnus goes bishop e6. Here I decide to play the move bishop e3. We trade, and Magnus castles, finishing his development. So really here the question is, can I take advantage of this isolated pawn potentially with knight d4, or will black be able to bring the queen and the rooks in the game very quickly, because I am slightly lagging behind on the queen side in development, and black could maybe even be better. So I go knight d4. Magnus plays queen b6 here, trying to attack the knight, the bishop, and the pawn down the road. I decide to take and go for this move b4. Now, this move felt a little bit awkward at the time because I'm still lacking in development on the queen side. But if I can keep this pawn on b4, say I get some setup like this, for example, just to illustrate the point, if I can get this setup with these knights and a double bastion in the center of the board, white is much better positionally, maybe even winning from a positional standpoint. So it's really a question of, am I being too slow trying to create something that's going to take too much time, or will I get my setup? Now here Magnus plays move c5, and this is a move that I was actually very surprised by during the game, because I expected him to go a5. I think I was going to play a3, and I thought that maybe I'm okay here, because after takes knight e4, I can simply go knight c3 here. And now these pawns in the center of the board are a little bit weak. If we get to this position, this is simply a dream for me here. I've got the double stack. Pawn on c6 is always being attacked here, and white should probably be able to win this game. So Magnus instead goes c5. I take, and I go knight d2, and at this point it's a very stable position. I'm blockading the pawn on d5 with the knight on d4, which is permanently loaded here, but the problem is it's also very hard to go after this pawn, because the pawn is guarded by the knight and the queen, and black can try to play against this weakened pawn on c3, or use the open b file for his rook as well. So I go h3 here, a very pragmatic move, creating the classic look for the king on the edge. There are no ice skater checkmates. It also stops black from playing knight g4 to harass the rook on e3. We get h6, I play queen f3, and now we have the move a5. Now at this point, time is pretty even, but the big issue that I have here is I have to come up with a plan, because Magnus simply wants to do a couple of things. He wants to go a4, take away the square from the horse, and then play rook b8 followed by rook to b2, creating the classic kebab. Now, it's very straightforward for black, and the problem here is that, frankly, I don't have a clear plan. I can stack the towers on the open file, but so what? Even if I get rook to e7 here, black can simply play rook c8, hitting the pawn on c3, and who cares about the kebab on e7? So it's a very dicey situation here, because I have to find moves. I don't have obvious plans, and Magnus is really tunneling on one plan of a4 to take away the square, and then play rook b8. So I play the very double-edged move a4 here to stop black from playing a4, but also to ensure that I now will forever have the square on b3 available for my knight, so that I can harass the queen on c5. Magnus plays rook to e8. I go rook to d3 here. There's also moves I'm not a big fan of, but I figured that if I trade off a bunch of pieces here in the long run, I'm in danger because I have two weaknesses, the pawn on c3 and the pawn on a4 here, and I think that I'm going to get outplayed and lose. So I play rook d3. Magnus goes rook c8, and now I play knight b3. We get queen c7, and here I play the move queen g3. Now I've spent a good amount of time in the last couple of moves, and one thing that's very important when you're playing blitz is knowing when to turn the beat around. Pun intended, obviously, that's a very famous song, but I'm trying to move quickly and just pick up that tempo and put Magnus under pressure. So I go queen g3, he plays queen b6. He does not trade the queens because now after takes, the pawn on a5 is a serious weakness here, and black is probably not even better. Magnus goes queen b6. I go queen to f4 here, just a simple move here. Maybe rook g3 is an idea to lift the rook down the road and put pressure on the g and the h files. Also maybe queen d4. I guard the pawn on a4, and it's a good waiting move with multiple possibilities. So Magnus goes knight e4 here. Now unfortunately for me, when I played queen to f4, I missed that knight e4 was possible because I thought initially I could just take the juicer, and if he takes, well, I win the bishop and win the game. Except I do not win the game because he has knight to e2, forking the queen and the king at the same time, and I simply resign and lose yet another game to Magnus. So I spend my time here, and ultimately I play the move queen f3. This is not the best move. I spent 32 seconds. Computer says after c4 white is okay here, but this move is very hard to play because everything is hanging here. The knights are a little bit loose, f2 is loose, c4 is loose, and honestly, if this had happened in the game, I think there's a good chance I lose because Magnus probably would have found this very nasty move queen g6, and here I would have had to take the pawn, hanging this pawn at f2 where there's now a fossil and all kinds of forks in play, and after rook g3, knight d3, and queen h4, queen b6, king h2, maybe I'm okay here, but after knight to e5, I still have a weakness on a4, pawn on d5 is blockaded, my rook and queen look okay, but they're not actually threatening anything here, and black can create the kebab with rook c2, and honestly, I think I would have lost this position. So I go queen to f3 here, a bit of a panic move, simply guarding the pawns on f2 and c3 at the same time, and now Magnus plays rook e5. Now I'm in bad shape here. I'm down nearly 50 seconds, and Magnus decides to use his time, and it's interesting to note that Magnus's intuition is so good that he uses time, but he actually doesn't find the winning move. In this position, if Magnus were to lift the c rook to c6 with the idea of rook to f6 here, I am in a lot of trouble because unlike the game, if I play the move c4 here, there's a very nasty move rook to g6, and if I take on d5, there's knight g5 here, I believe. Or wait, not knight g5. Knight g5 is good, but apparently bishop takes h3, sacking the bishop. And after takes, knight takes f2. Black forks the queen and the rook. Now I'm getting killed on the diagonal here. This is actually just very deep computer chess, honestly. Very, very hard to find without having 5 minutes or knowing that it's winning. But this is a great line to show. Magnus instead plays the move rook to e5, and now I play this move c4. Now, the reason I play this move is I figure I've got to clarify something. I'm low on time. I'm getting outplayed to some degree here. If I can get rid of these pawns, just make it so there are a bunch of open files and there are less pieces on the board, I probably will not lose the game. So I go c4. Magnus plays rook f5. I play queen to e3. He takes, and now very importantly, I take with the pawn. And black cannot take on c4 easily because then you lose the bishop. So we get the trade, and now bishop e6. We trade everything off here, and at this point I breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief because not only have I survived the danger, I'm also up 10 seconds on the clock. That being said, Magnus Carlsen is the greatest endgame player of all time, and he's very good at creating these little imbalances where you think you've survived, and then out of nowhere suddenly you're in all kinds of trouble. So here I play rook a3 very quickly. What I'm trying to do is press him on the clock, but this is in fact a mistake. What I should have played was the move e4, attacking the bishop here, and after bishop e6 and rook to b1 here, if black plays rook c2, I have knight b3. If I can get rid of this pawn on a5, even giving up these central pawns in the process, this will be a draw because it's a classic 3 versus 2 rook and pawn endgame. So I go rook to a3 instead, thinking I'm just going to go rook d3 and I'm completely fine. But after rook c2, rook d3, bishop to c6, suddenly to my horror, I realize that I'm in trouble because the pawn on a4 is weak. He's got the kebab on the second rank, and he has rook a2 to hit the pawn, and I'm going to need a bit of a miracle to survive. On the other hand here, I am up on the clock, which gives me great chances if I can keep playing with fast tempo. So I go rook d4. Magnus plays rook to a2, and now I play the move e4. Very important move here, because if I don't play e4, actually maybe rook d8 is a better line, but that's beside the point. If black were to take here, I can trade and go knight c4, winning the pawn on a5, and now the game will be a draw, even if black wins this pawn on e4, because again, it's a 3 versus 2 on the same side of the board. So Magnus takes. Now I go knight c4, we get bishop b3, and here I play the move knight to b6. Now you'll notice I'm in a lot of trouble here, but it's very hard to play because Magnus is low on time. But also after a4, rook b4, now the pawn and the bishop are kind of glued. You don't have an obvious plan. What you'd love to do is be able to go bishop e6 and then play a3 followed by, like, say, rook a1 and a2 with the bishop guarding the pawn and win the game. But you can't really untangle that easily here because the pawn is hanging, knight's always attacking it, rook's attacking the bishop. If you push, you lose the game. Actually, maybe it's still a draw because of rook b2, but you don't win. So you have to come up with the concept. So Magnus goes to f6. Now I play knight to d5 and Magnus plays king f7, and this is the start of going in the wrong direction. Magnus would have been winning the game if he had played rook c2 here, because what rook c2 does is it stops me from ever going knight c3. And now if I play knight b6, there's a3 sacking the bishop, and after a2, rook a3, there's rook c1 check. Black queens, I have to take, and this endgame, even though we both have 3 pawns, the rook will dominate the horse and Magnus will win this every time. Magnus instead plays move king f7. Also, I want to point out that if he were to take, this is actually going to be a draw because after a3, rook a4, king f7, I go rook a6, king here, d6, and now after king h2, or I thought this was a draw, maybe it's not. Actually, maybe this is winning after f5 and g5, strangely enough. I assume this was a draw, but maybe it's not. So I thought it was going to be a draw. Instead, Magnus goes king f7, and now I get knight c3. Now what I've done here is I put the knight on a much better square than b6, because now after rook a3, king f2, the bishop is glued to the pawn, and the knight has many more access points, whereas back here with the knight on b6, the knight isn't really doing a whole lot other than trying to attack the pawn. But once I get this knight rerouted to c3, now the knight hits the pawn, knight can go every which way here, and suddenly my chances of drawing become much better. Magnus goes bishop c2, I play rook c4, and you'll notice here Magnus is winning technically, but he's down to 6 seconds, and at this point blunders are probably going to occur. He goes bishop b3, I play rook b4, we get king e6, and now I play king e3, bringing my king closer to the center. Magnus goes rook a1, and here I play rook b7, and we get the move rook c1. Now I go knight to e2, and at this point it's very, very tough because Magnus is trying to not lose on time, but he's also trying to win, and at this point I felt very good about my chances to avoid losing, but more importantly even win the game. So we get rook c1, I go knight e2, attacking the rook, attacking the pawn on g7. Now we get rook a1 back, and here I play the move rook takes g7. Now I could have played knight to d4 and drawn the game due to the fork, but at this point I'm thinking, you know what, he's got 1 second, I gotta push him around on the clock. Material is even here, I've got a knight versus the bishop, the knight can jump every which way, and I'm probably gonna win the game. So Magnus goes king d6. Important, by the way, he doesn't play a3 because then I have knight d4 forking the king and the bishop. So he goes king d6, I play knight d4, he goes bishop c4, and Magnus is still trying to push p with a3 and a2 to win the game. But now after rook to a7, Magnus blunders with a3. He still is maybe marginally better with rook a3, but honestly I think at this point it's almost impossible to play. So he goes to a3, I play knight c2, and now I fork the pawn, I fork the rook, and suddenly out of nowhere I'm going to be up a pawn here after knight takes a3, where I have 3 versus 2, rook and knight versus rook and bishop. Magnus with 3 seconds, surely I'm going to win, right? Well, Magnus here keeps his nerve and plays king e6, and I'm going to be honest, this is an incredible move. At this point, Magnus has thrown away everything. He's taking a position where he was much better if not winning. Obviously, we know he's winning because we can look at the eval bar after the game, but probably Magnus thought he was much better, wasn't sure if he was winning, but he knows he's thrown it all away. So to keep his nerve here and play the only move in the position, which is king e6, literally I think the only move to not lose here, shows just how good he is, because even when he's messed it up completely, he still is able to find the best move in the position. So I go g4 here, we got bishop f1, h4, he goes bishop h3, king f4, goes back, and now I play the move knight b5. Now I would really like to keep the rook on the board, but unfortunately, or the rook's on the board, but unfortunately the rook is pinning the knight, and I can't really ever move the rook away because then I lose the knight in the game. And knight b5 is the only move here because I can maybe go king e3, he goes back, and if I don't play knight b5, I'll never make any progress. Also worth pointing out, if rook a5, bishop e2, for example, knight c4 here offering the trade of the rooks would never work, because after takes, bishop guards the rook on a2, and I've simply lost the game. So I go knight b5. Magnus decides to trade the rooks, he goes king f7, and now I play knight c6. Now I'm only up 7 seconds, but I've avoided the danger, I have an extra pawn, and only I can win. So it's very much a dream scenario. Magnus goes bishop e2, knight d4, bishop d1, and now I play the move knight to f5. Magnus plays king g6, and here I play h5, fixing the pawn on h6. Now this is very committal because I'm putting all my pawns on the same color as this light square b, but if I don't play h5, I can't really do a whole lot else, and it also forces the black king into the corner where it now guards the pawn. So I go knight e3, he goes bishop e2, king f5, king g7, and this is a moment where I thought I'd finally tricked Magnus and won the game when I played the move knight d5, but much to my horror, Magnus finds the only move in the position again, bishop to a6, and you're thinking, well, take. White has 2 extra pawns, you're going to win the game. But after check, hitting the king, king e5, and king f7, I'm simply stuck. I'm stuck in this position. I can't move the king because I lose the horse. If I move the horse, I lose the pawn, and now it's a very straightforward draw here because the bishop is always attacking the pawn. King d6, king f6, followed by king g5. Black will sack the bishop for something. Actually, I guess, yeah, he takes e6, something like bishop e8, followed by h5, h4, and the game should be a draw. So I go knight e3 back. Now the reason I mention this is because at this point I thought I had the game won, and I even said this on my stream, but then I realized my horde's not winning, and when that happens it's very difficult because you go from this pure moment of elation where you think it's over to suddenly having to play again. And for that reason the position is actually still a draw, but when Magnus makes a mistake with bishop a6, I miss my opportunity. I play check, king h7, and here I miss it when I play knight d4. If I had played the move knight to d6 here, this is a winning position because the bishop is simply dominated on the diagonals. The knight is covering all these critical squares, but more importantly, after king g7 and king f5, bishop cannot go back to c8 here, and if you go to e2, now I have knight c8 check, and I take the pawn and I win. Now let's contrast this with the drawn position, which is just to set it up. If black can get this position, this is a draw because the bishop gets his c8. But in this position, after knight d6 and king f5, black can't move the king without losing the pawn, and when the bishop goes away after check takes, there's no bishop c8, and when you go back, now I can very calmly move the knight, king f4, followed by knight e3, knight f5 again, and white will win the game. Instead I play knight d4, and now Magnus plays bishop c8. I go here, he waits, and at this point we're in a theoretically drawn endgame. So the game goes on. There are a lot of moves here. Magnus clearly drawing until this moment where he plays bishop d1. Now at this point I'm moving instantly. I think the game is going to be a draw, and when Magnus plays bishop d1, I simply instantly play the move king f4. I could have taken the bishop and won the game. I think in my mind I thought he had put the bishop on e2, and so I immediately play king f4, and then I realized I could have taken the bishop and won the game, but that's how it goes. So we got bishop e2, we got a bunch of moves here, and the game will end in a draw, as you'll see, because there's nothing really that white can do here. I'm trying to put the knight on f5 eventually, but the problem is because my pawns are on the same color as this bishop, there's really nothing I can do. If I get the king here and maybe get even knight f8 and some king g6, even here it's a draw because of bishop to e2, but maybe there would be some chances. So after king h7, I go knight c5, and the game ends in a draw. We end up playing a bunch of moves here before there's a repetition, but nonetheless it ends peacefully. Now it's a very choppy game, very back and forth. I could have been better or winning at some moments. Magnus of course was also winning if he had more time, but it's a typical blitz game where both sides had chances. At the end of the day it ends in a draw, but more importantly I actually end up winning Title Tuesday on tiebreak ahead of Magnus and Alexander Bordnik, as I had the better tiebreak, so I get my first Title Tuesday win since August 6th. It's been 2 long months since I last won, but a very, very hype event. I beat Danya, I beat Duda, I drew Magnus, I beat Oparin, I beat Zhigalko. A lot of wild, crazy games. I had a very nice win against Andreikin as well, but I definitely earned the victory in today's late Title Tuesday. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from this very, very hype event. We'll obviously also be uploading the actual video at some point in the near future, but I want to do this recap that's, hot and fresh on my mind. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps and content of all kinds in the upcoming days and weeks ahead. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day. Have a good one. Bye.